Hi, this is Sally Morgan, physical therapist, craniosacral therapist, and Tellington T-Touch practitioner for animals and people. And this is Tristan, he's a Corgi, and this is an episode of Conversations with a Corgi. And today we're going to continue our look at some of the issues that come about at the end of your pet's life. And I know this has been sort of a sad topic to have for weeks and weeks, but it's one we need to think about because all of us have pets that are going to get old and that are not going to be with us. And we really need to think about what we want that to be like for our pets. And so today I want to talk about this book, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, because indeed dying is part of life. This book is great for anyone who's working in any kind of hospice work with pets or humans, or even caring for senior loved ones. That book is a repository of knowledge and wisdom, and is a great thing to look at carefully. And I have to admit, you have to read it in small segments if you're dealing with death at that moment. But if not, it's a long read, a winter read, not a summer read, because it's serious. But it's well worth it for all the wisdom and insight that is in that book. So I just want to highlight a couple of things today, which is the overall theme of this book about the time of death in particular is the idea of peace for the person or animal leaving the earth plane. And really the book is about people, not animals at all. But it's really important to have a state of peace at the dying process. Some people believe that the emotional state at the end of your life can influence the afterlife or the reincarnation process or whatever you want that to be. In many different kinds of spiritual traditions, the state of mind and being at the end of life can be really dramatically impress what's going to happen after that. So if you die in the middle of murdering someone, it's easy to see that in many traditions you just go to hell and that's that. But it's more subtle for nearly everyone. And so it's really important that you be in this state of peace, and to acquire that state of peace, you need to make peace with your life. And I've seen this because I've worked with a lot of seniors in the nursing home where I worked when they were dying or near death or on the hospice unit. And it's so critical to them to be able to forgive people, to be able to ask for forgiveness from people, and to be able to kind of tie up loose ends in whatever way that may take in order to be peaceful about their own passing. Some of the suggestions that this book says is to be able to tell someone, what you need done and have them do it, or write it down for you and then mail it to someone. Or if that person's no longer here, just write it down anyway, or tell them. So it's really important to have that state of peace at passing. And that's something that we can create for our animals with peaceful music, no tension around them. If you have other animals that are fighting or kids that are fighting in the house, try to keep that far away from the place where one of your animals may be in the process of passing, because this state of peace is really important. And one of the things the book talks about, and I know this from a couple of my friends that do shamanic work, is that for animals in particular that are hit by a car or die violently and unexpectedly, shot in the woods, or all the things that can happen that are terrible, that in those particular circumstances, it is even more important that we do what we can to help them get to the other side, whatever that is, the rainbow bridge, heaven, whatever. And in many religious traditions, when you die, like in war, and you are killed unexpectedly and instantly, you don't have time to find that peace and that reckoning. And that is really important. And I know when I worked with people after 9/11 and people were jumping out of buildings, one of the people I was working with said that it was very disturbing to her that those people didn't have a chance to come to that state of reckoning and forgiveness and peace. But in fact, what she came to the conclusion of, because these people were jumping from very high up in buildings and they had a little bit of time, that in fact they did, as she put it, make peace with God, and then flew out the windows of those buildings. And so in a situation of extreme and enormous tragic ending like that, you still do have time, but not always. The animals that are shot in the woods might not have a second even to come to peace with what's happened to them. So the point of this is, what can we do about that for our own pet? Our own pet in the process of dying after we've provided hospice care for a couple of days, or in the case of roadkill and unexpected deaths of pets. So one of the things the Tibetan Book of the Dead suggests, and certainly powerful monks and people with a lot of spiritual training can do this better than others, and to the point where they may even revive someone. But all you have to do is surround that being with light and compassion and love, and just open your heart as much as you can in that moment to that being to go to a safe place. And I have a little prayer I usually say, which is, bless this spirit, give it safety and peace in its next life, and protect those that use this body for food. To me, that's really important, because in fact, around here, when something's been hit in the road, there's no sign of it the next day. So somebody's eating it and carrying it off. So it's really important to ask for their safety as well. I know that I moved a dead fox off of the side of the highway once, because foxes mate for life. And to leave her lying there with the mister waiting for her and looking for her and sitting by her would endanger his life too. So I picked her up and brought her home and buried her in the woods by my old house. And it turns out a couple of other people had buried some hawks and other animals in that area. So that's a bit of sacred ground there. And it's well protected by the people that live there right now. They've put some rocks over it and things to make sure that nobody digs that up. And it is quite close to their house. So it is really sacred ground. But it's really important that we allow animals to pass with peace and with security at their moment of passing. So what you can do is just, I love to do this with a T-Touch heart hug, and to just put your hands over your heart. You're going to make that circle and a quarter, starting with a face of a clock like this. You're going to start at the 6 and go around a circle and a quarter back to the 9, just with your two hands like that. And do that with a deep breath as you're imagining that being surrounded by light. And of course, you can't do this when you're driving, but you can say that little prayer. And then when you come home, do a couple of heart hugs, or when you get to where you're going, and just imagine that little being surrounded with light to help them find their way across the bridge. And you can do this with people. I can't tell you how many times I went into an empty room in the soldiers' home where I was working and did heart hugs and prayers for the dying on the hospice unit. A lot of them didn't die for like 2 weeks after I did that, but I think that it brings an element of spiritual transition to someone or some being that is in the process of crossing the rainbow bridge in a way that is very helpful. And we can all do this. We can all send love and compassion and light. The idea of light seems to evoke some of our core being of happiness and peace for that being that has been hit by a car, or is in the process of transitioning, or who has had an unexpected and violent death. Somebody that dies on the operating table, for instance, animal or person. That is a kind of a traumatic situation. So it's really important that you give them that space with some heart hugs, deep breaths, sending light, to allow them to make that transition smoother than it was by the active events in the world. So that idea of peace is really important. So if you are in the process of working with an animal that's transitioning, make sure to provide that element of peace for them. And I know that with one of the things the Tibetan Book of the Dead suggests, or Living and Dying, as it really is called. People call it Book of the Dead, but it's not really. It's living and dying, because dying is part of living and living is part of dying, is to make an altar for that person or animal that is crossing the rainbow bridge. So what that means is you put things there like pictures of loved ones that may be across the bridge or on this side of the bridge, things that are important to that being. We made one in the barn for the horse that I was working with in the process of his hospice care over the course of a week. We had some LED candles in there, a picture of him and his beloved pasture mate who had already crossed the Rainbow Bridge. I think we had some of his favorite kinds of treats there, like an apple just sitting there. He couldn't eat them at that point, but things that meant something to him. Some people will use crystals, like quartz crystal, or I think in his case we use some rose quartz to help with the heart chakra stay open so that he can find the animals that he loves across the bridge. And that really makes a difference. And it also gives you a sense of peace when you approach that animal. And I made a sort of an altar for Comet when he was crossing the Rainbow Bridge with a picture of him as a puppy and some LED candles and some other things that meant something to both of us, some of his toys, his collars, his leashes. And so you can do things like that, and always remember to leave the collar open. A couple of animal communicators have passed this along to me, that when your animal is across the Rainbow Bridge, you don't want to leave the collar closed. You want to open it so that they can run free and completely make that transition. And they can find their way back to us. No worries about that, but we need to release them. And so leaving Comet's open collar by him on his altar with some of his baby pictures and some of the other things that mattered to me and him was a way for me to create some reverence around him during that process. And I think it brought him some peace. And certainly with that horse, we had the story of me and my friend on the phone evoking the horses, the ancestral herd from across the Rainbow Bridge, introducing him to every horse we knew that had ever died. And the way he was greeting every one of them, that really helped ease his process. He could see where he was going, and yet his body was still in our care on this plane, and he was getting the comfort he needed physically, but he was also getting that spiritual transition. So that can also be helpful, to sit quietly with your animal and call forward the spirits of animals that your dog or cat may have known, or that you have known, so that they can find friends across the Rainbow Bridge when they go. And this can really also help bring that sense of peace to you, because you're getting that connection across the Rainbow Bridge as you invoke these animals that you used to know. And that's helping your animal cross the Rainbow Bridge as well and find those that he loves. Oh, thank you, April. So it's really important to do these kinds of things when your animal is dying. And if your animal isn't in hospice care and you're just doing that thing that so many people have to do because they're in acute liver failure and you have to go to the vet, when the vet says to you, would you like a moment alone with him before we come in? That's when you do the heart hug, sending him the light in your mind, silently or out loud, saying the names of animals you know across the Rainbow Bridge, so that that pet can find those other animals when he gets there. And I like to give them a description. I think that helps them, because you know how many dogs across the bridge are named Rover or something. So I like to say, he looks like this and his attitude is this and he knew me when, and to really help them find their way. And to keep giving them that sense of light when this happens. A lot of people will be able to hold their pets in their arms when this happens. Another thing you can do is do heart hugs on them like this as they're going or after they're gone, because they're still in their body for several days, really. And one of the things I meant to talk about in a more extended one of these, but I haven't yet, is that idea that the craniosacral rhythm doesn't really stop on the long tide for a couple of days after the animal has passed. So there still is some essence of them there. And another thing that this book, The Living and Dying, talks about is when someone's unconscious or in a coma or in surgery, they are still really aware of what's being said around them. And I was telling my friend yesterday that Bernie Siegel was really revolutionary in talking to the people he was operating on when he was doing surgery. People thought he was a nut, but it made a big difference. If there was a problem going on, which the example he always uses is if there's too much blood in the area and he can't see what he's doing, he would just talk to the person's liver and ask that liver to take some of the blood away from the area, and it would clear magically. Nurses were really shocked by Bernie's methods, and he would say this out loud after time, but initially he was just doing it silently, and he was shocked at how well it worked. So one of the important things to remember is that even though that animal or person may be unconscious, when you're with them, you can still talk to them like they're still here, because they are, and they will hear you. So it's really important to be able to tell them how much you love them. And if there's any bad feelings between the two of you, forgive them. or offer forgiveness so that they have that sense of peace when they go. And certainly with our pets, we don't hold grudges against them for peeing on the living room floor or something like that. But, you can offer them a lot of gratitude for their time with you. And even when you have to bring them to the vet, you can do all of that when you're with them. So I like to kind of make a list in my head of the things I really need to do in that moment and think about it occasionally, and imagine myself doing these things, sending them peace, sending them light, finding that sense of forgiveness and gratitude, and invoking the spirits across the bridge. Those are the important things to do. And, I always try to give myself plenty of time with my animals when they're crossing. And not all of us can do that, depending on where you live and how busy the vet is where you are, and whether you had the vet come to your house, and if they need to take the pet with them. But certainly, you can do all of those things while you're present with the pet. But if you're in a situation where the pet's body is taken and is pretty quick and you have to get out, you can still just take some time when you get home, maybe with the altar you've made for your pet. A lot of people will do this. They'll make a little place in the house with some LED candles and a picture of the pet and some of the pet's things. You can still help them. They're in a spirit state at this point. So if you're not physically with their body, you can still send them light, call in the spirits from the other side, help them find their way, and bring them peace across the Rainbow Bridge. So those are some of the important things from the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying. I highly recommend that you get it, and you can even just flip through it and find amazing things that are helpful if you have to work in the hospice care. Even if you are, for instance, a vet tech and you're not really working in hospice, but you are there for lots of dogs being put to sleep, or vets for that matter. But let's face it, not many vets are going to pick this book up, but vet techs can, and they can change the atmosphere in the room with the animal. They're usually the ones that the vet comes in and then walks out, and the vet tech is taking out the IVs and handling the pet. So it can be really helpful for them to have some of these practices available to them when they're dealing with these animals. It can bring you a lot of peace because, animals die, and it's part of our working with them. And so it can be really overwhelming for someone that's had to do a lot of that. But you can find a way to bring light and love and compassion even in these hard situations. So thanks for joining us today for this episode of Conversations with a Corgi. And we will be back tomorrow around 9:30. I think we have maybe 5 or 6 more episodes on this topic coming up. I want to look at some of the modalities you use when a pet's in hospice care and why those particular modalities are helpful. And I also want to look at, what else do I have down here? Near-death experiences and how that can be helpful in working with pets in this situation. So we will be back tomorrow. Everybody have a great day. Sorry to start with this grim topic, but it is important. And really, the spirits of our departed animals are all around us right now. So remember that. This is a way to connect with them. You can do heart hugs and ask them to help you. So we're going to have some sunshine here. It's super cold out in the west right now, and that's coming here. And my poor little boy has a hot spot from dealing with the flea situation. Poor Tristan. Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll see you tomorrow. Everybody have a great day. Stay close to the pets that you love. Oh, Danny, 17 degrees. I would snuggle up with those pets and just enjoy the day reading or watching TV or catching up on some writing, whatever you have to do. Stay warm. All right, we'll see you guys tomorrow. Thanks for joining us.